mystical, so unpredictable, here on the SNL Network.
Yes, that is right. So welcome everybody on in to the Saturday Night Network here for another edition of SNL Stories, our podcast series where we interview special guests and alumni of Saturday Night Live. So excited to be here today with a guest that goes back all the way to the original days of the show and get to hear some amazing stories of the time that we just want to know so much more about. So very excited to introduce our guest in just a moment. But first up, have to introduce our co-interviewers here as well. And of course, joining us on all of our SNL Stories series, it is James Stevens. James, how are you?
John, it is great to be here. I'm excited. I'm like a kid in a candy store today. You know, this is going to be a great day of conversations, like pulling the candy lever. It's the Levy lever.
Yes, exactly. Pulling the candy levy. So excited to get into all of this with you, James. And we are joined today by the wonderful Andy Hoglund from SNL In Review, Entertainment Weekly, Vulture. Andy, how are you?
John, I'm doing quite well, and as always, it's a pleasure to see both you and Mr. James Stevens. So thanks for having me on the show.
Of course. Looking forward to your questions as always, Andy. And now it's time to introduce our special guest here today. So like I said, this guy goes all the way back to the beginnings of the show since its incarnation. He was, if I get this right, and you'll tell me, Neil, you were an extra on the show.
Yes.
You were a writer on the show.
Yeah.
You were a talent coordinator on the show. So it is my pleasure to welcome Neil Levy onto the podcast. Neil, how are you?
Thanks. Good. I'm good. How are you? I'm good.
I'm doing really well.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
And
Yeah.
of course.
I love your song, by the way. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, Neil, very excited to have you on and to ask you some questions about your time at the show. But I think it sort of makes sense for all of our listeners to go back to the very beginnings and how you sort of got started with, you know, your connections to Saturday Night Live and
Sure.
and how you joined the show. So would you mind giving your SNL origin story to our listeners?
Lorne is my cousin. He's a first cousin, and I was I wasn't what you call a ne'er-do-well, but I was I think I had ADD. I was one of those kids, and school was a nightmare, and my parents didn't know what to do with me. And Lorne, first he suggested I try art school because I had been doing art, and I went there, and he was very close with our family. He worshipped my mom and dad. His dad died when he was about 13, and I worked briefly on the Heart and Learn Terrific Hour. I don't know if you know about that show. It's one of his CBC shows. I was an extra in a piece where they were rounding up clowns in Canada and substituting accountants at children's parties. And I was a soldier, had to jump off a truck, to round up a clown. So I think he looked at my dad as kind of a father figure after his dad died. And I know he loved my mom. And so when, we followed his every move, when he did Laugh In and all that, whatever he was doing, my mom was, right there. And I remember hearing his first jokes, he would come over and tell a joke, But then one day he came over with Paul Simon to our cottage, and I ended up doing, at that time I was into magic. I was doing stand-up, not stand-up comedy, magic, just going table to table and doing stuff like that, and close-up. And I remember I did some magic tricks for Paul Simon, which impressed him, and Edie Baskin was there too. And Lorne took me down on the dock, and he said, we're going to do this show. It's a show for us. And I remember being, a show for us, like he's a lot older than me, but I was very flattered that he included me in the us. And he said, we're doing a show, and I want to know if you'd like to be my assistant. You have to move to New York and do all that. And I immediately said yes. I couldn't wait. So that's how it started.
That's so interesting to hear that. There was something that I read, Neil, or maybe it was one of our previous conversations, kind of, as you talk about these celebrities like Paul Simon, and I think it was maybe, Mick Jagger was at Lorne's house, and you turned around and saw him there or something.
Oh yeah,
But
so I had this. Yeah,
I remember you said something about like this is Lorne before he's Lorne Michaels, and he still had like this gravitational pull to people,
I have
right?
no idea. He is a very charming guy, and I think he went to after Laughing. I think he went to London and he hung out with the Monty Pythons because I think he had done like Laugh In that gave him an in. I think he may have produced the Lily Tomlin special. But suddenly he's like good friends with Eric Idle and Michael Palin and Mick Jagger. And I think Tom Schiller has the same story because when I first moved to New York, I slept on Lorne's couch. And coming home one day, and there's Mick Jagger sitting on the couch where I normally sleep, and he had a beard. And I remember Lorne saying, "Neil, you know Mick Jagger." I'm like, "Oh yeah, of course I know Mick Jagger." And I went over and I went to shake his hand, and he just stared at my hand because I don't know what was wrong with what he was on at that time, but it was a long time ago. Later, Mick Jagger was around, on and off. You'd see him here and there, and he's the most accessible person. I mean, he's a really cool person, and I remember my brother talked to him for half an hour about architecture. So anyway, so I flew down to New York, and at the beginning, Lorne and I shared an office. There was no room for me, so I just put up my desk, like it was just facing his. So
Was that at the 17th floor?
17th floor, yeah. Apparently, they were thinking of giving him Rockefeller's old office, and he didn't want it. It was classic and cool, but it wasn't big enough, so he turned it down. Anyway, so I shared an office with him, and I was there, from the very beginning, watching him put the thing together. I'm the guy who put up the cards. That was one of my big jobs. I had to, when an idea would go down on a blue or pink card and go up on the board. And
that's kind of amazing, Neil. Just to interject, to think like the structure of the show, the colored note cards, the structure of the production week that you were there at the beginning to see that has been really, in many respects, untouched. These 40 some years later,
it worked. I don't know why change it. And yeah, I remember the early days. It was just. I remember going to see like. What was it? Eugene Lee had done the sets for some Broadway show, and Lorne and I went to see it, and then Lorne and I went out to California to see the Groundlings because he's looking for cast. And I remember going to Catch a Rising Star to see Andy Kaufman and other people. I was involved in the looking, and Lorne always said, "What do you think?" So I remember Paul Rubens auditioned in the Groundlings,
right?
And I thought he was great. But
would you have casted him if it was your choice?
No, I absolutely agree with Lorne. He said he's too one note. Like he had that one thing he was doing, and that's what he did.
Got it.
Even in the Groundlings.
So Neil, I want to ask you, when you're first starting, basically you said you're sort of working hand in hand with Lorne at the time, but I do want to ask about something in particular that I saw online from our friend Joel Navaroli. Has this site called SNL Archives, and it really tracks all the history of all of the sketches and all of the players in each sketch. And you are, one of the biggest extras as far as appearances in sketches, probably in the history of the show, where it seems like they were putting you in so many sketches in the backgrounds as like an additional role. So what went into that? Because you said you were doing a lot behind the scenes, but then you were also on camera as well.
Well, for one thing, I wasn't getting paid very much. So if they would put me in, I was so happy. Maybe I expressed my happiness, and they like to see me happy. So I was like, okay, we'll put Neil in. Also, I played the guitar and the violin. So whenever they needed something like that. And but they put a lot of people in. A lot of the people that were around the show were in scenes and stuff. You know, I was always a bee, killer bee. You know, it was always that. And then later, when I was casting, I thought, well, maybe I'll put myself in once in a while, myself. You know, just and odd things. But I loved going on. I thought that I just yeah.
Neil, I had a question. It sounds like you were very young when you started on the show. I think I read that you were the youngest cast and crew person there.
Yeah, sure.
Overall.
I was a kid. Yeah.
And I think James said it really well, or maybe he was attributing this to you, Lorne before Lorne Michaels. I love that phrase. You know, so I was curious about a few things. The first, just to go back for a moment, did you live, you know, around the corner or 2 minutes away from Lorne when you were growing up?
Well, it was more like 5 minutes away, you know, by car. Yeah.
Could you jog there if you wanted to?
I could have jogged there, sure. Yeah.
But what's your earliest memory of him? Not, you know, the Mick Jagger memory or the Mighty Python memory.
He was driving me home from the cottage, and he had an MG, a sports car with a top down, and he had on Penny Lane, and he looked at me and said, "Can you believe these lyrics?" He said, "Listen to that, blue suburban skies. Do you realize how brilliant that is?" And I was just nodding my head. That's one of my first memories. He also, you know, he's the only one. You come to the Passover Seders, and he could do one of the prayers is a song, and it's like really long, and it's involved, and each verse adds more to it, and he could do it really fast. I was very impressed. Very impressive.
Okay, wait, sorry, Andy. I just gotta say, I think my family plays that game also. There's like right at the end of the book where you have to keep adding stuff to it. We used to just try and do it.
I think it's I've got ya, and it goes on and on and on, and it keeps adding.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
He's very quick with that.
Well, we'll have to look at the family tree and see if the Schneiders connect to the Michaels somewhere.
Right.
I wouldn't be shocked. Yeah.
But Neil, I was also curious. You know, some other original members of the SNL cast and crew are in your life before, you know, you get to 30 Rock, like Howard Shore or Rosie. Do you have any stories of them?
Well, I knew Rosie because Rosie was married to Lorne, and they actually had their engagement party at our house. Do I have any stories? No, none that I can share. You know, but yes, you know, they're great. You know, and you know, I was in Lorne's office when Rosie got her job. It's like, this is so long ago. It's like,
sure, understandable. Yeah.
Whatever. Yeah. Whatever.
I just love the origin story of this stuff. You know, like what's the Marvel MCU version of Howard Shore walking in the door?
Well, Howard went to camp with Lorne to Timberlane, if I'm not mistaken, and they did plays there together. And then Howard had a group, Lighthouse, I think it was called, which was pretty successful in Canada. But they just remained friends, and then Lorne immediately hired him. Howard is one of the nicest people I know. You know, he let me stay in. One summer, I had no place to stay. I'd lost my apartment, and I stayed in his place in Hell's Kitchen for a couple of weeks because he was gone. That was really nice of him. When I got to New York, you know, my parents had warned me about drugs, not to do drugs, and so of course I said I wouldn't do them, and you know, and so we get there, and maybe you guys have know this story, but there was a Howard Cosell had a show called Saturday Night Live before Saturday Night Live, and Al Franken decided he wanted to have a party to watch that Saturday Night Live. So we all went over there. This is probably a month before SNL went on the air. I'm not exactly sure the date. And there was all these people. I think Hunter Thompson showed up, and all the writers and cast from SNL, and other people I didn't know, but I felt very insecure, and I was the kid. And there was like a bowl of pre-rolled joints. like you didn't even have to smoke this stuff. You just looked at the bowl and you got stoned. So, and they started passing a joint around, and I did not want to seem like a kid, so I passed it. It just came around, and then we'll go around again, and then the party got really quiet, and I started getting really paranoid. And I started thinking that people were quiet because of me, and they were like looking at me. And I don't know, I just got horribly paranoid, and I went and I locked myself in the bathroom. But it's the only bathroom in the place, so after 5 minutes, people start knocking, and I'm just a minute, and I like flush the toilet and go, oh no, I didn't mean to flush the toilet. I'm not done yet, and I was like and then I remember praying to God that this would go away. I was in such a horrible state. And finally, I get a knock on the door, and it was Dan Aykroyd. And he said, Neil, I said, this is Dan. He said, you probably smoked some of that pot. You're probably paranoid. You probably think you're the only one. Let me tell you, my friend, you're not the only one. We all smoke the pot. We're all very stoned. We're all very paranoid. He said, if you come out right now, I can talk you down. And he talked me out of the bathroom. And I remember, the only thing I remember from that is that I couldn't get my shoulders to go down. My shoulders were like this. And I was like walking out of the bathroom, hoping no one could see me. And maybe my shoulders were like a wall so no one could see me. And
did he ask you to listen to some Allman Brothers with him afterwards?
He actually took me into the bedroom, and he did things like, are you stoned? He just did that kind of thing. And then he pulled his pants down a little bit, and he walked over to the radiator. And he was a radiator repairman, which it must have been. Now I'm thinking. I thought about this years ago, but that he was a stock character that he brought with him, from Second City. And he was like, "Oh my God, Mr. Levy, this is a beauty. This is a Radisson 2000. I haven't seen one of these in a while." And he started working on the radiator, and he ended up doing that as a refrigerator repairman later on at SNL, but. I thought I saw it first. He made me laugh, and he calmed me right down. He's one of the nicest people you'll ever meet in your life.
It's amazing, and it's not lost on me, Andy, that some of that very Aykroyd language shows up in a sketch. So
yeah, it's the Jimmy Carter, yeah,
right. He that's he does that. He wrote that. But
so Neil, you said something about absolutely, it's a long time ago, and we don't expect you to remember everything. But part of this, is to certainly acknowledge and sort of almost celebrate, your being there. I mean, let's be honest. You were there. You played a juror on the first episode. So you're on the first episode of this show that is now an institution. What do you remember, if anything, about Lorne brings you in, you're sharing an office, your desks are facing, there's a lot of pre-production for months, and then the week of that first show and the night of that first show. Do you remember anything specifically about that?
I do remember a couple of things, it's all kind of a blur. I mean, to be honest with you, you don't know at the time that this is like the time of your life right here. Right. And remember every bit of this and write it all down. It's just, to me, I was like 20 and I'm like running around doing things. They had me, I think there was me. I think I was the only production assistant, and then they brought in Doris Powell and I'm not sure when she came in, but I didn't get to bed till 3 a.m. every morning, and I'd have to be back at the office by 10, and, it was like constant. But what do I remember of that week?
Or even just that night, you got to go on because it's live.
I remember that I think Billy Crystal was booked on that night, if I'm not mistaken. And yep. I heard his agent, Buddy Mora, screaming at Craig Killam, who was the associate producer that year, screaming at him in the coffee room that this is not over, and we're threatening, all that stuff. And Craig just having to take it and going, "Oh, we're really sorry," But so I remember that. I remember being in the hall, and this may not have been the first show. Was Chuck Berry on the first show? No, he was on.
Not that we know of, unless you want to break it here.
No, he wasn't.
Did you guys cut Chuck Berry?
No,
He was the musical guest in the middle of season 2.
No, I'll come back to him. Oh, that's right. So that's season 2. Who else was on that show?
Well, I do
Andy
know
Kaufman.
that there was a George Carlin
Oh,
sketch
George Carlin,
that got cut.
Yeah, and not only that, but if I'm not mistaken, I was standing beside Lorne when George Carlin deviated from his rehearsed set and decided to do something on Roman Catholics and natives. And Lorne said something like that fucker. Something like that. Let's just say he didn't say that, but it was something like that. And he took off into the booth because he had promised the censors, everything's going to be fine, because there's no 7-second delay. And, part of that was that this kind of crap isn't going to happen. It's the reason Carlin never came back. Lorne just, put him on whatever list.
Well, and this is sort of the formation of Lorne too, because I know we've I think read or heard you talk about Lorne quitting, just walking out when they take his lighting person away or something like that.
Yeah,
to
he
just
did.
Prove a point, right? So can you tell us a little bit about just like
Well, that was on the Robert Klein show,
Episode 5.
Yeah, episode 5. That's right. And yeah, they took his lighting person. They took Phil Himes away, and or was it Scotty? Did they take the sound guy away, or was it the lighting guy? It was the lighting guy. It was lighting.
Honestly, I'll take your. Yeah, I was absolutely sure, but
I thought it was Scotty Schachter. I thought it was the sound guy, but it could have been Phil. And he argued with him, and then he quit. And then he called my dad. I remember saying, "What do you think I should do?" And I think my dad was of the opinion that. Well, he asked him all these questions, like, "Well, what does this mean to you? And can you walk away? And do you need the money?" And all the questions you would ask somebody who's like about to quit. Anyways, he decided to quit, and he walked away, and it was all in secret. We had a secret meeting at his apartment at the Osborne, and no one was to know. Robert Klein never knew. I mean, I'm sure he knows now, but he never knew at the time. And he kept asking me, "Where's the producer?" And I had a different excuse every time he asked me. "Oh, he'll be here. I think he's, probably at 4, or whatever." And it's just like he never showed until near the end when I think that they resolved it, and then he shows up. So I thought it was pretty cool. That was really cool, huh?
I just want to say for the audience, I mean, that episode also had a very weird thing where ABBA didn't show up either. Or they showed up and they had to do a pre-recorded musical performance. And I remember you, Neil, in particular, were sitting at a table watching ABBA's performance as the studio pretended to get flooded. It's a very interesting, unique episode.
I was a
waiter. You were a waiter.
Yeah, waiter. Exactly.
And I had to fall over because the ship was sinking. But I don't know if I'll tell you this one thing is that the word went out that the girls in ABBA weren't wearing panties. Of course, it was. So every writer was on his hands and knees right behind that set. I wish there was a picture of that.
Speaking of the writers, Neil, I wanted to jump to season 3. I think you're on the staff at that point, and was curious about your thoughts on the famed writers' revolt. What was that like for you as Lorne's cousin? Are your allegiances?
It was terrible. First, Dan Aykroyd comes into my office and he says, "All right, I know you're his cousin, but I got you're a writer now, and you're one of us, and we've been working together, and you're gonna and so he shows me some sort of budget that he's discovered that where there's $30,000 for the writers in the budget. I'm just throwing out numbers. I don't really know what the numbers are. But the writers are only getting like 15 or something like that. And where is that rest of that money coming? I mean, and he was like really pissed off, and he had just assumed Lorne was pocketing it, or I don't know what he would assume. And I went to Lorne and I said, "There's a little bit of a revolt going on," and he didn't really seem to respond. And then I was kind of torn because I was a writer and as well. So I just kind of kept my mouth shut from that point on. And then as it turns out, yeah, he was using, because the budget was so thin when the show started. He was using that money for props and sets. You know, he had diverted it as a producer, and it was up to him to negotiate with the writers. So that's what they negotiated. So that's what they were getting. So that there was more money in the budget for them doesn't mean he has to give them that money. You know, he's a good producer, and he needed the money to make the show get on the air anyway. So we're all sitting in the writer's room, and Lorne comes in. Maybe it's because I told him this was going on, and then he says, "What's going on?" And Dan Aykroyd stands up and gives him a rundown, and he goes, "I see," and he just turns around and walks out and goes down the hall to his office and goes in, closes the door. And everybody got up and ran. Lorne, no, wait, Lorne. And they were all like banging on his door and we're sorry, Lorne. And he didn't open the door. So he like waited. I don't know when he made up with everybody or when it was okay again, but that was the end of that. I mean, so not a great story, but it happened. And
But do you talk to him later about it? And he's like, "Wow, I really played you guys," or "Wow, Dan Aykroyd's an ass." Like,
no, he didn't. No, he did not talk to me about that. It was like it happened and it was resolved, and let's move on. That's basically it.
Interesting. Let me ask you about season 3 a little bit more, because that season, Neil, is widely regarded as potentially the greatest season ever. There's so many like amazing moments, amazing episodes in that particular season. Do you have any memories of any sketches that you worked on, or any of your favorite moments?
Yeah, I worked on a Bees sketch with Ann Beats. That was kind of a hit. I worked on. I did a thing called Funeral Magician because I was into magic with Bill Murray, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I know it's not coached that way, but it's the first time he did that Las Vegas singer character where he sings at a funeral. He's does a whole kind of act at a funeral and ends up sawing the casket in half. Yeah, it was with Hugh Hefner and Gilda. I don't remember anything else. It's just that year is a real blur to me.
During the height of all of that, people will always look at the beginning and the first cast. I mean, that's a couple questions. I remember reading someplace that Lorne, after that first episode, maybe even turned to the whole cast and crew and said, well, I guess we're a hit. And everybody's like, where are you getting this from? Because it took a little time.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that he is a good producer, as you said, to kind of motivate folks.
He used to post the negative reviews on the bulletin board for people to look at. There was a real rebellious kind of feeling in the whole thing that we're doing something, they're not going to get it. They're not going to get it. And then they're going to get it. Lorne said, we're never supposed to write down to anybody. If they don't get it, they don't get it. Fuck them. They'll have to learn. That was the...
Nowadays, they just post the negative podcasts up on the bulletin board.
Yeah. Probably.
Luckily, there are none.
Right. And I don't think anybody knew they were a hit because I remember being in the Nielsen's at the time didn't take into consideration college campuses. And Lorne kept saying that's where we got an audience and they're just not registering that. And I know he was telling that to NBC. And when we first really knew we were a hit was when we went to New Orleans. And when the cast was mobbed, when we went to Jackson Square. And it's the first, I think the only time the show was ever done out of the studio, and it was kind of a nightmare. But it was fun for me. Also a nightmare because I was running. I just never stopped running. And,
have you been back there since?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, good.
I remember one sad story there. There was a guy who had a parrot, and there was a sketch in a courtyard of pirates. And he had a parrot, and we told him that we're going to be shooting off these guns, and said maybe you better have the parrot like on a wire or something so he doesn't fly away. Oh no, I got him trained. He's not going to move. Don't worry about it. Bang, zoom. The parrot shoots off, and I don't think he ever saw the parrot again. kind of sad. But anyway,
You tried to help him.
I tried. You can only try.
I know that you have shared over time some of the, kind of behind the scenes, maybe more tender moments with your close relationship with like John Belushi and Gilda, as someone who really, knew her. How would you describe her? And is there anything about John that you'd care to share?
Gilda was just, hard to. Gilda was a doll, just as bright and cheery and funny off camera as she was on. It was always a joy to walk into her office. She always wanted to know what I was doing and who I was dating and what's going on, and because Wybell was her writer, her guy, and I was really good friends with him. We all went to lunch all the time. So, and then we'd buy her every dessert on the menu. That was our big thing. She was, one of a kind. I know. What else? I mean, I can't, I don't really want to tell you some of the things that were told to me, or stories that might not, that that they would be up to her to tell, and she's not around, so I really shouldn't tell them. But anyway, I know that I can tell you one thing. When what's his, let me see, the hell is his name? He was in Godspell with her in Toronto. You guys would know his name.
Marty Short?
No.
Victor Garber?
Victor Garber. That's it. Wow. Good memory. And so she wanted me to meet him because he had saved her life. And I said, well, how did he do that? She said she was going to kill herself and had laid down on a road, on a highway or something like that. He ran out and grabbed her. So something like that. And I thought she was joking, but then I saw that she wasn't. So.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously we've heard some incredible stories about her life, and I appreciate you sharing some more with us. So I do want to ask you, so there is a really interesting point in SNL's history, naturally, where season 5 comes to an end, and then we lose what was left of the original cast, and most of the writers, and Lorne Michaels decides to move on. And
Right.
for you, my understanding is that you actually stayed on board and elevated yourself actually at Saturday Night Live into a more powerful position. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Actually, no. I had left the show and gone to Los Angeles and ended up working with Chevy for a year, or a little more than a year, writing a pilot for NBC, which I wrote with Chevy. It was called Sans Souci. It was about a minimum security prison that they sent like really wealthy people, where the biggest punishment was, you had to clean a jacuzzi, that kind of thing. So Chevy and I sold that. Chevy sold it to NBC anyway, so we wrote that. I got a lot of Chevy stories, obviously, but that's a whole other thing. And then I came back. Gene Doumanian called me and wanted me to come back, and so I knew enough to call Lorne and ask him if it was okay, because I had heard, things are not great between him and Gene. The way she had done it, the way she came on board. The way she became producer. So I called him. He said, do you need the money? I said, yeah. Do you need it? I said, sure. And he said, fine. So I went back to SNL on that year, which was an absolute nightmare from day one.
Well, Neil, I do want to acknowledge, what some might see as a bright spot in that season. You above Gene even is credited for giving Eddie Murphy his very first shot. Very famous story if listeners haven't heard it. Neil, you start getting these random weekly calls, right, from a young teenager. My question is, how does Eddie Murphy, even get that phone number in the first place? Could you just back then look up NBC in the phone book and request an audition, or how did that come about?
No, you could find out my name and then call the NBC operator and say, please give me Neil Levy's office. At that time, I had like a secretary. But there was a secretary that was secretary to a bunch of other people too, like that. And if you just kept at it, I was 24 years old at that time, or 23. No, it's 24. I would pick up the phone myself often before the secretary could get to it. So, he'd call up, And he'd say, I know, and at this point, Gene had found a guy named Robert Townsend. You guys all know the story, so I don't know if you want me to tell the story.
Yeah,
But,
Hollywood Shuffle. But no, let's hear it.
she had found Robert Townsend, who was great, and he just hadn't signed his contract yet. So Eddie starts calling me up, and I often use this as an example to people, and I say, persistence. You just got to keep at it, especially in show business, because they get so many people who send them their glossies or now you send them whatever the hell you're sending them now, but it's persistence. So he just kept calling me, and every time he'd get through, he would come up with some funny story or something else funny that made me laugh about how he had to have this job and he had to get on, and I said, well, it's really because Gene I heard she was already hiring somebody. Things were already going bad. I mean, just the way things were really kind of oppressive on the show, even before it began episode 1. Anyway, the last time he called up, I remember him saying something about that he had 18 brothers and sisters, and they were all counting on him. None of them were working, and they were all counting on him to get that job. And this was, and he made me laugh. I said, okay, you know what? You can come in. I thought I would interview him just as an extra. So he comes in, and he starts doing his bit. He did a thing. He did Bill Cosby. I remember he did. Well, one thing I remember, he did these 3 characters in Harlem where he acted. He had written this, and it was all 3 characters. A little guy instigating a fight between the other 2, which he ended up doing on the show. It wasn't like a great piece, but when he did it to me in the office, I realized the guy can write because there was some really classic comic beats in it. And so and then he started blowing me away, just his characterizations and his energy. And I just was like, wow, this guy has got everything on top of which he could write. So I thanked him, and, in his mind, I said, thank you. And I escorted him to the door. I doubt that that's the way it was, because I usually get very excited when I see talent, and this guy has had talent, just beaming out of him. So I went to Liz Welch and Mike Zanella. I said, we got to get this guy on the show. Well, but we got Robert Townsend. I said, I know. Gene's got to see him. So I arranged for Gene to see him, and Gene sees him, and I was worried that he wouldn't be as good second time around as he was the first time around, but he was even better. I mean, he just, he was freaking great. And so he leaves, and then Gene goes, nah, I like Robert Townsend better. I'm going to stick with Robert Townsend. And I blew a gasket. I just got really angry, and I was so upset at the time. I think I said something like, I don't know that I can stay here anymore. And she stopped, and she said, well, and then she said, I can make him a featured player. And so I said, fine. And she did. And I think he wasn't a regular only because of me, despite me, and because she had to make that concession. And so she didn't make him a regular, which is what Robert Townsend would have been. He wasn't going to be a featured player. And then I remember going to Eddie at one point where I think he was getting $600 an episode. And I almost was apologetic about that, because he's now on the cast, and he's, of a major show, and he's getting $600, which, back then was still kind of a lot of money, but not for a TV star. And he looked at me and he said, that's okay, man. He said, I'm going to be a millionaire before I'm 21. And I remembered that. And he was. I think he actually became a millionaire from whatever his first movie was. Yeah.
I have to know, who broke the news to Robert Townsend that he was no longer going to be a cast member?
I don't know.
Or what about, wasn't it Charlie Barnett? Wasn't he involved too, or no?
Charlie Barnett was on the show, but I don't remember. I really don't.
Okay, so Neil, I want to ask you about season 6 cast auditions. Were you present while other people were auditioning? And do you have any...
I was there. I don't have,
Did you know Denny Dillon going in?
I did not know her, but I think she's a swell person. I really like Denny Dillon, and very talented.
So I feel like one of the most famous stories about somebody auditioning and not getting the part was John Goodman. Is there any memory or truth to this?
I
That he
don't.
auditioned
I
season?
worked with Goodman years later, just on my own little cable television thing, and he was good enough to come in and do voiceover, and he's a swell guy too. But I don't know anything about his audition for SNL. That's for Gene. He auditioned. I seem to remember that he auditioned, but was Ebersol or Gene?
I think it
It
was
was
Gene.
Gene.
I think
It
yeah.
was Gene. Yeah. No, I don't quite remember him.
What
Gilbert.
about, do you have any good Patrick Weathers stories or Matthew Lawrence stories?
Matt Lawrence. Oh my God, was he? Matt. I don't. I mean, they're both nice people. Pat was a little bit out of his element. I think he was very talented. He could do a couple of things, but it was a nice enough guy. Matt was a great guy. I don't have any stories. Sorry.
Following up on John's question though about John Goodman, like I've heard Mercedes Rule was coming down to the final slot against Denny
She
Dillon.
was. I auditioned Mercedes Rule first, and I thought this is a very talented person, and I wanted her to get the shot. And Gene said no.
Can I ask you a more like theoretical question about SNL auditions? This was an interesting debate we were having on the podcast last year. There was a really famous TikTok that blew up over the summer with someone putting out their audition for Saturday Night Live. They said, "Oh, I want to be on the show," and they did a whole thing, and it blew up online. And we had this debate on the podcast of if Saturday Night Live auditions for cast members should be open to the public or not, because the audition process is so secretive as far as, there's like people like you, like in the shadows, going out to comedy clubs, watching people and then bringing them in for auditions. And, as fans, like we want to know more about that process of getting on the show. So do you think that there should be some type of open audition?
Well, all I can say when you open things up to the public, it would be impossible. I mean, all of this, I was in charge of the home movies back in the first season or 2 or 3 or whatever. And I remember John Head brought me this thing, Mr. Bill. So I watched and went, that's great. I got to put that on. So Mr. Bill goes on. So as soon as Mr. Bill goes on, and remember, anyone could submit a home movie. We started getting all these videos of people with their heads exploding, arms cut off. It's like they watch Mr. Bill and go, "Oh, that's what they want. That's what they want." And it just became this horrible, violent, gory kind of like every week I loathed, I was like dreading looking through the pile of videos for a while anyways. So to open things up to the public, how could you even do it? I mean, you'd have to hire a lot more casting directors to go and look, I don't know what the process is now. Back then, there was a couple of places you went. There were the improv places, Second City and the Groundlings, and then there was the comedy clubs. And then there were agents, submitting people. It's probably different now. I have no idea.
I sort of pictured it more like American Idol style auditions where you like walk in and there's judges and
yeah. No, I don't know. I don't think
they should try.
Do it.
That would be a fun idea, though. Yeah.
During the audition talk, we just sort of alluded to something that I wanted to circle back to again. You deserve the recognition, the praise, the celebration, whatever. This is interesting. I think you have the rare distinction of being one of the only people to work for all 3 executive producers.
Yeah. Yep. Probably, yeah. No, Leo.
Yeah.
Or Akira.
Right. Some of the crew, but I mean, your role, especially in a talent, and you were a writer there for a little bit. I mean, it just had to be interesting to see from Lorne, who is family, and then Gene, and then to Dick Ebersol.
Well, let's just say that Lorne would be at the top of the list of those 3. Yes.
No question.
Yes.
Is it true? Did Lorne really come back to see Dick's first show?
He did. And Dick kind of screwed me on that one.
So he's in the building. Lorne comes to see that first
So
show.
I got to preface this by saying that I'll digress for a minute. When Dick first came on, he was, he didn't know what he was doing, to be honest with you. And he decided he was going to do short films. So he was going to break the writing staff into two. And one side was going to write a short film about, I can't remember what, and the other side was going to write a short film about a bag lady. Where he got that idea, no idea. Bag lady. So like 5 writers who said, you're going to write a short film, 2 minutes long, about a bag lady. Make it funny. So they wander away, scratching their heads, and they come up with something. And I think Denny Dillon plays the bag lady. And so I walk into Dick's office, and he's watching the finished bag lady film with Michael O'Donoghue, sitting there puffing on his. He had these brown cigarettes, I think what they're called. Virginia Slims, I think is what he had. And Dick says, is there anything we can do to save this? Michael says, no, nothing. He says, well, wait a minute, Dick. He said, if you took out all the sound and you just had footage of Denny Dillon sitting on the bench, and then you added funny voiceovers of people passing by, that's the only thing I can think of. Great, Neil. I want you to go and get the cast, and I want you to tell them first get the writers and have them write funny lines for a bag lady sitting on a bench and the people passing by, and then I want you to go to the cast members and I want you to get them to record it. So I go, okay, I can do that. So I go to the writers and they give them this assignment, and they write it, and then I go to the cast members, Charlie Rocket and everybody else, Mary Gross. And fine. But what I didn't realize, he had now handed this piece of shit over to me. I'm now producing it. I'm just doing his bidding, I'm like this kid going, oh, okay, great, And of course, it was terrible. I mean, there was nothing good about it at all. So the night of the show, Lorne's coming to the dress rehearsal. And Dick is all, he gets out of his desk to let Lorne sit back at his desk on the 9th floor. The king is back, And then he says to Lorne, Neil did this great bag lady film.
Oh, God.
And I'm like, well, and then he says, Neil, can you get me that list of blah, 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 blah? And he sends me out before I can tell Lorne that never happened.
That wasn't you.
Which I eventually told him, but for a long time, I think he thought I was responsible for that piece of shit. And anyway, I just thought that was interesting that he handed that off to me.
It's interesting that he did that. It's interesting to hear kind of maybe his lack of comedy chops and O'Donoghue leaning on him. But also, I think most of us SNL historian types picture Lorne during those 5 years where he's not at the show being completely removed and at arm's length and off someplace filming Three Amigos or something. So to think that he was, the new show, but to think that he was there, that he came back to that first episode was for Dick was interesting.
Dick did basically keep the show running till Lorne came back. So you got to give him props for that.
So season 7, the first year with Ebersol producing, was your last season with Saturday Night Live, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So, and was mostly like, would you have liked to have stayed on if it had not been for your relationship with Dick Ebersol at the time, or it was just?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. He bullied me. He bullied me physically. Like when I think about it, I remember one time walking down the hall. This would be hard for you guys to even believe, but he's a big guy. I think he's probably 6'3", he must be. And I'm walking down the hall, and there's no one else in the hall, and I'm walking towards him, and he sees me, and I go, morning, Dick. And he veers out of his way, and he body checks me into the wall and knocks me off my feet. And I'm like, holy. And I got up, and I immediately apologized because I thought I had done something. Maybe I tripped but I hadn't tripped. He was just physically intimidating me.
Wow.
And then
Well, he is from the football world, so
well,
I
that's
guess
how you do it. And the second time he did it, affirmed that because he did it again. He knocked me, he smacked into me. The third time, I was ready. And as he came towards me and he veered towards me, I just went full steam into him and bang, we banged into each other. And he was like, "Oh, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." "You all right?" "Yeah." And he never did that again. He did other shit, but
Wow.
not that.
All right.
So that wasn't a pleasant experience for me. He did send me to get Catherine O'Hara. That was fun. He said, "You want your job?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Sure." He said, "Go to Toronto and bring me back Catherine O'Hara. I don't care what you have to do to get her here. Just get her here." And so I flew to Toronto. I called her up. I had lunch with her. I fell in love with her immediately. She's just a really delightful person. And I managed to talk her. I took her to my home, I managed to talk her into coming to New York. So she comes down to New York, and she's met at the airport by Danny and John. And then I remember we went to a party that night. And I don't know what I can tell of this. Never mind. I'm going to stop right there. But all I will say is that so Ebersol really wanted her, but she hadn't signed a contract. And then there was a day when Michael O'Donoghue wanted to address the writers, and he wrote death, I think, in red paint on the wall. And Catherine O'Hara looked at me, and she just went, "No." And she was gone that day.
So Catherine O'Hara, Laurie Metcalf, and Emily Prager were all really interesting cases of this weird sort of dynamic that was, switching over from Gene's era to Dick's era. And, those two in particular, Metcalf and Prager, I don't know if you have any memories of them coming in, but they came in for basically the last episode of season 6, were barely on the show and end up being sort of like a footnote in the history of SNL as these weird cast cases. So for you as a talent coordinator, any interesting thoughts there?
No.
Okay.
No problem. I remember, but I don't have any interesting thoughts about it. I remember hiring, I could remember things like when Miles Davis did the show. That was an interesting thing for me because I really liked him. I really dug Miles Davis, but Ebersol didn't know who he was. And unfortunately, they said he was jet lagged. Well, this doesn't actually. This is kind of a negative thing about Miles Davis. I think he was on heroin, to be honest with you. Because about a minute before showtime, when Joe Dixon was standing in the dressing room door yelling, "1 minute," and Miles Davis had locked himself in the bathroom, and I'm trying to get him out of the bathroom, and I finally get him out with like 30 seconds to go, and I'm him along to get on stage. But then, as anybody knows, Miles doesn't like play to an audience. He kind of walks around. But I think because of the heroin, his energy was really low. And he was like walking around and just hitting one note, and the band was smiling. I haven't looked at it again since it happened, but they knew something was up, something was wrong, and then Ebersol walks up to me and he goes, "What's going on?" I don't know. I said, "It's great." I thought quick. I went, "It's great, isn't it? It's like real. It's like great TV." And later, his manager told me that he was jet lagged, so I'll buy that. It's possible. They had just come back from Japan, so he was an older guy. So anyway,
I was just going to say, John, when you were bringing us back to the crazy transition between Gene stepping away and Dick coming in, I feel like with Neil here, we can't. It would be remiss to not mention Charlie Rocket.
Yeah,
and at least the F-bomb, right?
Sure.
Yeah, you're in that sketch.
Was I in that? I didn't even remember. I was. No, I wasn't. No, he said that right at the end of the show. And
well, no, you're in the after midnight sketch, I believe. I mean, you were the one there, so I don't know if you don't know, but
No,
I thought that you were.
But in the it's reference to what happened earlier. But then in the good nights, I'd like to know who the F did it.
Was who else was on that? Who was the musical guest on that show?
It was Charlie's Tilton.
Because Prince was on that one, I think.
Prince.
Yeah.
Prince. So I remember, booking him and because I thought he was really talented, not because he had a number one hit or anything, because I don't think he did at the time. But
he was not Prince, no.
But I think he may have said in his song, and or something that sounded like it. And the censor, whose name I forget now, she was like a beehive, like a gray beehive haircut, and
Clotworthy.
No, Clotworthy was earlier. It was in the 70s. I forget her name. But she looked at me like, did he say fuck? And I went, no. I mean, she had the lyric sheet in front of her, and I go, no. It's not there.
She said flogging.
Yeah, it went by her. But then when Charlie Rocket said it, there was no. And then I remember Davey Wilson stood up and he threw his script down and he went, "That's the end," and he walked out while the credits were rolling. And then I remember that Charlie Rocket was he was made to write an apology to every affiliate. I don't know how many affiliates there were. He had to write a handwritten apology to every single one of them.
Wow.
And either, I guess maybe he typed it. That's the word that went around at the time. He had to write it, but it probably.
Dear Peoria.
Right. But that was the last straw for Gene, that particular show. I think that's the excuse they were looking for. But, I knew she was going just before she did, because she told me she had had dinner with Dick Ebersol. And I went, "You're done." I just knew it. I remember telling Leo, I bet they're thinking about him. And I was right. It was like the day later she was gone and he was in.
Okay, so Neil, I also wanted to ask you. So since season 7, obviously Lorne, since season 10, Lorne's been back after season 10. So have you gone to go visit the show at all? Are you currently watching the show? Any fun?
Yeah, I watch
moments?
it. I watch it. I watch the highlights the next day. I watch like the 5 best sketches. I don't watch it from the beginning anymore, but I do watch it, and. Occasionally I'll go. I haven't gone. Actually, I haven't been there since the 40th anniversary. I haven't been back.
How was that?
That was amazing. That was really amazing. I remember going into the ballroom, first walking in with Larry David, who I also knew from the old days, and Seinfeld, walking behind them, and I heard Larry David said, "This is pretty fancy," to Seinfeld. Yes, it is. As they're walking in together, and so they actually talk that way to each other. Anyway,
that was the after party.
Yeah, the after party, and then I remember hearing music in the ballroom. So I walk in, there's hardly anybody in there except Paul McCartney's tuning a guitar on the stage. I went, "Holy shit!" So I obviously stuck around, and he started playing. He just played all this stuff, and then of course people started pouring in as soon as they heard the music going, and everyone wanted to be on stage with him. And then Taylor Swift got up and started playing with him, and then she wanted to play one of her songs, which I guess is only fair. And then he stopped. He played along with. He did back her up on one song, and then he left. And I thought, I was angry at Taylor Swift because he would have played for another hour, for all I know.
And those Taylor Swift tickets are expensive now, so
yeah,
you got the show.
That's true.
So Neil, how often are you in contact with your cousin Lorne at this point?
Oh, weddings and bar mitzvahs, funerals. That's about it. I talk to his sister all the time, but he's a busy guy.
Right.
So I don't know how many people might know this, and I just want to make sure that we talk about it, because I am certainly impressed. And when you and I first connected a while back ago, we're talking about music. I think what that story about playing guitar and violin, because you've done that in a couple of sketches, as a musician. I'm a musician. We talked about music, and you're like, "Hey, I've got a band." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." Ladies and gentlemen, if you were just hearing this for the first time, please do yourself a favor. Lemmings Inc. That is
Thanks.
Lemmings Inc. Seriously, it is acoustic. It is folk. It is rock. What I love about it is you listen to several tunes, and there's different, it had different feels. I hear Simon and Garfunkel sometimes, Peter Paul Mary, Bob Dylan, Cat Stevens, no relation to me. Richie Valens on one of them came out. Like, the harmonies are tasty. The lyrics, Neil has written these lyrics. They're super intelligent. They make you think. They make you
Oh,
chuckle.
thanks, man. Really appreciate it.
I think one of my favorite songs, love them all, but really, Sweet Reality has this. There's this refrain, this chorus. It could be like an intro to a TV theme or something like that. And really, the construction, musically speaking, from verse, to chorus. Sometimes the bridge takes you to a halftime feel, guitar solos. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, Lemmings Inc. It's strong, my friend, and I want to hear more. So, what can you tell us about the band? What can you tell us about your music?
The band is I'm I've just been working on another album now, so thanks for mentioning that. That's good. You can get the music on Apple Music, or Spotify, whatever.
And I'm not blowing smoke. Like,
Yeah,
if I
no,
brought my wife in here,
appreciate it.
if I brought my wife in here right now, she'd be like, "Yeah, James." Sometimes it's just you listen to it to kind of just.
Well, one of the songs. Remember, God Created Stupid People Too. That one.
Oh God, yes, I love
that
one.
was suddenly for some reason caught on in Pakistan for a couple of days,
Really?
and I started getting hundreds of messages in Pakistani. What is it, Urdu? And it must have, it just, because it's about religious intolerance, so it possibly, rang true to them in some way.
And that's an example of intelligence and humor wrapped into one.
Well, I was just saying for one small moment, I was the Rodriguez of Pakistan. I don't know if you guys ever watched that Searching for Sugarman. Did you ever watch that?
Neil, if you, I guess we'll head towards wrapping. So if you don't mind telling our listeners where they can find your music or anything else you're up to.
Oh, well, thanks for giving me that opportunity. There will be a new album in the next month, but right now you can get that album on Apple Music. It's Lemmings Inc. is the name of the band. The album's called Follow Us. I didn't do much promotion the first time around. I'm planning on doing some promotion this time. Well, so anyway, that's where you can get it. Anywhere you can get music, you probably get it.
Awesome, Neil. Well, thank you for joining us, and thank you for
thanks
all
for
of the
having
stories.
Me. It's been fun.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, thanks. I'll just wrap the podcast. I'll just start with Andy. Thank you for joining us today. Of course, everybody should definitely check out all of your articles and recasts with Saturday Night Live coming back this weekend with host Aubrey Plaza. So please tell the listeners where they can find all of those and anything else you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if folks want to check out my Twitter, which is at SNL, it's right there, at SNL in Review. Or if you want to go to the main source, ew.com, those recaps are updated live during the show. So this was fun. Neil, thank you so much for coming on. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Yeah. And James, thank you as always for joining us and putting this whole thing together. So appreciate you. Anything else you want to say to the listeners?
I would just say, on behalf of being Andy's biggest fan, please go check out his writings because they are great.
No, I'm James. I'm your biggest fan. I'm just here to back up.
Save it for the podcast.
John's getting all insecure. He's like, "Who's my biggest fan?" John, relax. It's okay. We love you too.
Well, listeners, thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Neil Levy and getting to hear all of these amazing stories back to the original days of Saturday Night Live. And of course, if you've been checking out our podcast, you'll know that we just wrapped up our Cecily Strong career retrospective, which was really a wonderful love letter to her career on the show. Amazing cast member that just left us in December. So we went through all of her greatest moments. That was this past Monday night. And then coming up this weekend, we have host Aubrey Plaza, musical guest Sam Smith, where we have the Hot Take Show immediately after the show airs. Come join us live on YouTube. We'll break down all of the sketches. And then next week, of course, we got our roundtable Monday night, our By the Number show Wednesday night, and then our patron feedback show on Thursday night. So non-stop coverage of Saturday Night Live returning for the next 3 weeks. Very excited to break it all down with you. You can find us at the SNL Network wherever you look for podcasts or on social media. So for James, Andy, and Neil, my name is Jon Schneider from the Saturday Night Network. Thank you for joining us today. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.